Hello, and thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to have a conversation about grief and does it truly last forever? And I think this should be a really interesting experience because I am joined by two of the women I respect so deeply, so very much. And they both have their own experiences. So we hear from many people, often experts, that you will grieve forever. And I want to dive in to this from our various perspectives and from various losses. So at the end of this recording, I will ask both Dawn and Sandy Kate to give any contact information they would choose. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll be able to find it printed below. But today I'm joined by Dawn and by Sandy. Thank you both for joining me.
It's nice to be here.
Wonderful to see both of you. So that statement, and it's an amazing thing, and I don't know what your experience has been, so please join in at any point. I always feel like this is handed down as a pronouncement. You will grieve forever. How does that land for each of you? And has that changed since your most profound loss or not?
Well, I can say that it definitely has changed. And because you had, because I knew we were going to talk about this, I started thinking about earlier losses before my husband, who took his own life 9 years ago. And those would have been, I had two grandparents, who died. And then I had actually someone I knew as a child who died. I didn't know her real well, but she died in a car accident. And when I was young, I can honestly say that the grief didn't last any time at all. And I think the reason is because I didn't have a real, strong relationship maybe with the people. Certainly not the girl that I didn't know very well, but my grandfathers. I just wasn't around him a lot. I mean, even though when I lived next door, he still wasn't someone who was really a big part of my life. Now his wife was, but not him so much. And I mean, the grief on all of that was really minimal. But then, when it comes to the other circumstances, and I've had four, like in 9 years, both parents and actually two husbands, but one suicide. And that, I mean, I have to say, I'm not at forever yet, but it certainly hasn't stopped. And it's changed a lot. But for me, it hasn't stopped. It's just less intrusive now than it used to be.
Oh, I'm going to have a lot more questions about that. So thank you for sharing, Dawn. Sandy, what are your thoughts and what are your feelings around this?
Well, I agree with everything Dawn said. And I too was thinking about it, knowing that this was going to be one of the topics. I actually Googled grief, and the Oxford Dictionary says it's deep sorrow, especially that caused by someone's death. So deep sorrow. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's when we lose our grandparents, that's the natural order of things. We expect to lose our grandparents at some point. Yes, it's sad, but it might not be super intense and super long. When it's a very, very close death, and it's very often the traumatic deaths that are shocking, I think there's just a lot more layers to it, and it can keep you down for a long time. Do I think it's possible to heal? Yes. Am I there yet? I don't know. In fact, remember last week I was messaging you, Sandy, about, well, how do you know if you're healed? What does that mean? But I do believe that it's possible. There's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts there, though.
And I think that that's where it becomes very, very interesting. And I think I feel like grief is too short of a word for everything that's in this. Because when I think about some of the losses, I mean, I was brokenhearted when my horse died when I was 13. That was absolutely grief. No, I'm not saying it was the same as when my son died 13 years ago, but both were grief. And I think about Barney and it makes me smile. He was a horse. But do I feel profound sadness? No, I don't. I think about the relatives who meant so much to me. I've been blessed to have some of the craziest, most amazing uncles and aunts on the planet. And I miss them. And I wish that my grandkids could meet them. And I was broken when they died, but I don't grieve them anymore.
Mm.
So what does that mean? Does it mean I'm defective? Does it mean the experts are wrong? Or does it mean that grief perhaps changes into something else? Does it transform? What does it mean? And when you hear someone say you will grieve forever, what does that mean to you?
That sounds like a terrible statement. That sounds so hopeless. Like it's hopeless. So it's like, if it's never going to get better, then why would you want to keep going on yourself? And that to me is a very dangerous thing to even suggest when it's people who have had a close relationship who took their own life, because that was a choice. And so to me, it's a little scary for people to say stuff like that, just a blanket statement, because it's not true. And I expect that, that there will come a time when I won't have, the difficult times anymore.
Yeah, I agree that it changes over time and maybe it does become something else. I think I've been doing a little bit of Sandy Walden binging lately. And there was one of your videos. Well, because I just finally found your YouTube channel and subscribed. And there was something that you talked about. Gosh, I'm losing my train of thought. But it had to do with I lost it. It's gone. Sorry. It'll come to me.
It's always okay. I almost feel as though I would like a series of words.
That's what yep. So the different words, different languages
Okay.
you are missing from me, or yeah, so there needs to be different words for grief, because yes, the beginning intensity is much different than a few years down the line. Does it still hurt? Yeah. Am I still sad? Yeah. But is it the same? Does it mean it's going to be forever? No.
And I remember, Dawn, I think you hit the nail squarely on the head, my friend, when you said it could be dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think so many of us have lost someone to suicide. I think about somebody who's lost someone maybe in a tragic car accident or a disease, or no matter how they died, if we tell the people who are left that this is, buckle up, get in and buckle up would be the way to do it, that this is going to last. Wow. And if I would say, well, it's only with this sort of death that you'll feel it forever, or only that. But I know so often I go and I read from experts, people I respect tremendously in so many ways. And when I see you will grieve forever, I kind of want to say, can we get on the phone and talk this out?
Yeah, because there's other people hearing that and believing it. That might be true for that person, but why spread it around?
Yeah, exactly.
How about say, for me, I feel like it's never going to go away.
When you just said that, Sandy, that felt like such a relief. I could care about you, but not necessarily feel that it's always going to be horrendous for me. And that when I hear you say for me, I feel like, okay, I can open up my can of compassion and share some with you because I feel differently, but right now maybe you need a little more.
Well, and then for a mental health professional to talk that way too, they teach us to use I statements. So, and we're all different. We all process things differently. We all have complex thoughts and emotions. I just don't think that it's fair to make any kind of blanket statement about most things, really.
I think that is really sort of at the crux of the whole thing, isn't it? Does grief last forever? And I find myself wanting to say, maybe, but maybe it's transformed. If I'm making a pot of soup, those carrots, the celery, the onions, the wonderful beef all look and smell different and taste different after they've cooked for a while.
Mhm.
Well, I have been simmering for a long time. And I remember the earliest days after my son died, I'd never heard that expression until my son died. And Mike died when, at the time of this recording, it's been 13 years. And when Mike died, he died of suicide at the age of 23. And I went looking for the experts. So I would Google and I'd go to the library and all of those things. And that was the prevailing message I saw. So that had never even been a part of my imagining before that. Had this been something both of you had heard before you've had your most profound loss, or did it show up in a different way for you?
I used to actually think that way because so my profound losses have been my sister, suicide in 1992, my child, Katie, in 2020, and then my husband 15 months later. Pretty sure he believed that grief would last forever. So, but when my sister died, there's no resources, there's no social media. I'm 14, I don't have any choices as far as my care goes, and I have to coddle mom and my younger siblings. So there really was no, my way of processing was to try to learn about what the heck happened here. How could she not know that this would destroy us? And it took many, 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 many years. Like, I really do think that if more help had been available to our family, some drama could have been prevented. We weren't healthy. So, but yes, I did think that it would last forever. I did know that it changes over time because I had experienced that. And the way I used to describe it was like, so there's that hole in your heart and it's always going to be there, but you're going to form scar tissue around it. And it's not going to be this gaping, painful thing anymore, but the hole is still there. Maybe I kind of sort of still believe that because you always wish that it didn't happen. You wish they were here. You miss them. It hurts that they hurt so bad that that's what happened to them. But I do think that there's healthier ways of grieving now. And so much so that by the time we lost our child, I knew that I had to heal because I had to stay present for my son. Having experienced losing a sibling, I wasn't going to put that burden on him to be strong for me, So I knew that I had to learn how to heal so that I could teach him how to heal. If that makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
How about you, Dawn? Was it an expectation that you'd always had? Was it something that showed up at some point?
Well, I have to tell you, grief to me didn't even exist. I was like, it was not a part of my life in any way, really. I mean, I had lots of dogs that we lost. And I think in some ways that kind of made death just something you kind of expected, even though it was an animal. So when I had, my husband took his own life, and I found him, and then 6 months later, my dad died. And that was at home, and I was there, and I was holding him and trying to just take care of him as he's dying very difficultly. This wasn't like an easy kind of death. And so I think I was just totally unprepared. Totally unprepared for what this was going to be like, because I just don't remember our family delving into how did it feel, when your grandma died. And I remember there was a lot of like, I don't even know, judgment, I guess, like from my mother about different things, about whether or not the casket was open, or, things like that. That was what the grief was about to me, was all these ways that things were done wrong, or, my mother was judging that things were done wrong. And, which I guess isn't, but then you don't really grieve. I didn't accept or acknowledge any of my emotions, any of them. And so,
It was all very mental and thinking through instead of feeling through, wasn't it? That's what I'm hearing.
absolutely. That's how I dealt with it. And and so, the first thing I did, almost the first thing, was I called a therapist I had been seeing, and I said, well, I think I need to see you, and she made a special thing for me to see her like 2 days later. And because of the kind of person I am, I guess, she said, wow, you're just doing so well. I don't think I need to see you. I think you're fine. I'm like, okay. And yeah. And this, I had this happen more than once. So, and then I realized also just recently that, of course, each one of us is so different in how we are made up. Like, what is our basic makeup? And for me, I just found out that I am like, if you look at elemental, what are your elements? I am almost all water. So that means I am very emotional. And my grandmother, who was next door, was super emotional. And I can remember being with her and thinking, I am not going to be like that. I'm not going to let things bother me like that. And, so I think early on, I kind of had some kind of mechanism for stuffing stuff down. And that was kind of what I did. So it took 8 years before I actually got any real help. And actually shortly before that, I talked to someone when I had moved to another state, about a suicide support group. And this was during COVID. So it was done on a Zoom. It was actually a phone call. And I was the only one who showed up. And there were like 2 like facilitators. Yeah. And so, you tell your story, and and they both said, well, I'm pretty sure you have PTSD, and you need to see someone who, specializes in that. And there was somebody right there in my little town. And I went to see her, saw her a few times. And once again, it's like, well, you seem to be doing really well. And I don't understand how they figured this out. What was the criteria?
That's a really good question, isn't it? What is the criteria for determining if someone is doing really well? Because I've had the occasion to have conversations with both of you many, many times. You're very, very different people. And I get to be a third one out there, and I'd probably be the oddball. But I know we've all stepped into this and processed in very different ways. So how would you measure someone else's, or maybe what kind of questions would you ask them to help them measure where they are? Because it seems to me that you, Sandy, and you, Dawn, would be much better at determining how you're doing with your process than I would be.
Well, I think you just hit the nail on the head. You have to believe a person when they say, I'm not okay and I need some help. You look at each of us and we look just fine, but you can't tell what's on the inside. And this is kind of where, maybe the missing link between maybe a therapist and a support group is the coach, because you've been there. you have personal firsthand experience with the topic at hand. This therapist has learned the academics, but having gone through it, you have a certain level of empathy, and you know firsthand that, yeah, I look fine on the outside. I can go to the grocery store and not break down until I get into the car, and nobody's going to see that. And, you know, and I don't know what it is about our culture that we have to hide our emotions, but that's the way it is. But yeah, I think that, you know, I don't want to talk like therapy isn't important, because I'm in therapy and I will continue to stay in therapy, because it does serve a very, very important purpose. But when a therapist says, "Oh, you're fine. I don't think you need to see me," to me, it almost seems, and I had one say that, it almost seems like she doesn't know what to do with me. That's kind of the way I took it.
And wouldn't it have been interesting if you would have had a little note card that said, okay, this is when I asked, tell me how you've determined that. What is it based on?
Yeah.
Do we
Yeah,
agree
and
on the
I've had
criteria?
them all call me very resilient, because I've told them that it bothers me to be called strong. So then they change the word to resilient. It's like,
Well, and okay, so what I found on the resilience, because I am also very resilient, is it's like you can be resilient to this point, and then you get to this point, and now it just all falls apart, and you really cannot, you don't even know when it's going to happen. It just comes out of nowhere, and usually in public, and can be just really, and that's what happened to me. And it's just, you just feel so completely out of control, and you just don't know when things are going to erupt. And I'm talking sadness, not like anger or anything like that. But
well, that can show up unexpectedly later too.
oh yeah, absolutely. Anything, any of that, you know. And but in working like with Sandy, I was so surprised at how easy the process was, really. I mean, to me, it was pretty easy. It wasn't like it was impossible and I could do it on my own, but I needed someone to tell me how to do that. And
like she made the map.
yes, yes. And I was like, oh, okay. And it was really, really helpful to me. And as far as like healing, I'm not sure. I guess, yeah, I guess I'm getting there, but I don't know that it's all, really there yet. I don't know if it ever will be. I don't know, but certainly it's a lot better than it used to be.
So when I think about these experts that I do respect so much, I just don't necessarily agree with. And I guess it's because I tend to resist anything that says, here is the box. There's no opening. It's this size. It's not bigger. It's not smaller. It doesn't change color or shape. When something is handed down as an all-knowing, complete truth, that bothers me a little bit, unless, of course, I'm the one handing it down, and then it's completely different. So if I could have someone say their grief has not ended yet, and maybe then it would be comma, but this is how it's transforming so far, and we'll be having other conversations, certainly, because Sandy, you brought up earlier something about what is healed, what might that be like? And I often like to say, what does healing look like? Because I think healed would be different for all of us, just like profound grief is different for all of us. Not that it's more or less, but maybe yours is blue and mine is green. I don't know. It's just not the same, right?
Right.
So if someone would ask you, do you believe grief absolutely needs to last forever? Or does grief last forever? See, that word needs. Where did that come from? What does it mean if your grief doesn't last forever? What does it mean if your grief does begin to transform or to ebb? Does that mean something?
Well, I think that particularly with, you know, a parent who's lost a child or somebody who's lost someone to suicide, where there's this whole either out of order or guilt factor, it's almost like, maybe taboo. I don't know if that's the right word. But it's almost like you have to give yourself permission to feel better, because how would it be if I lost my child to suicide and I'm healed? What will all the they people think of me, you know? So there's a little bit of, you know, there's the stigma, and there's the, you know, what the culture says and thinks about such things. Um,
How about what
no.
would you think about that? Does that bring any judgment from you about yourself?
Well, and that has changed too. It used to, like, I can remember not wanting to let go of the hurt because somehow that meant letting go of her. And now I've just decided, nope, I'm taking her with me everywhere. You know, that's just the way it is. But I think that when society, it's such a normal thing to say that, you know, oh, losing your child or losing someone to suicide, you're never going to get over it. And then to actually go through it, you know, we're all surviving a loved one's suicide. We have to somehow get through it. We have other reasons to live.
That's big, isn't it? That's big. And there is something, what does that say about me? And I kind of felt giddy inside when you said, no, I'm taking her along with me. I don't
That's
have
all I
to
can come
stay.
up with.
I like it.
Well,
I
and I
like
do
it.
think too, you know, I was talking to someone recently who lost their husband to suicide, and it was extremely traumatic. And how am I ever going to get through this? I'm never going to get through this. I'm never going to get through this. And I'm like, well, we have choices. Would I have said that before losing Katie? Maybe not. I mean, I found my hero, Sandy Walden, and changed a lot of things about, you know, what I think and feel. So yeah, I mean, I've changed the way I think about this stuff a lot.
I wonder what it would be like if we could have a conversation with the experts, the professionals, and truthfully, Dawn, you're the expert on your grief. Sandy, you're the expert on yours. And maybe I'd like to hand mine off to somebody else to know it, because it's too much for me to worry about right now. But wouldn't it be interesting to have them expand on what those thoughts and feelings are? You know, those conversations that we've had, even a little bit earlier, about how it might have transformed. So if someone would say, your grief lasts forever, what if that's part of a phrase and not a complete sentence? How might you change that? Would it be, well, maybe there's a piece of it? What does it sound like now?
You know, I can see that grief is like so many other things. It's like a history. It's a memory. It's something that happened. You can't like ignore a memory, I don't think. And so, yeah, grief. I agree whenever you're talking about the semantics and how there should be more than one word for grief.
Well, or like a spectrum or
Yeah.
something.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, because it really changes. I mean, my goodness, it has to. If it doesn't change, then, you know, that's a serious problem. That's a serious problem that needs to.
Yeah, well, there's like a diagnosis now. That's what complex grief or complicated grief or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, where you're just so stuck and you just can't get through it. And I mean, maybe there's certain types of people or certain types of losses that happens with. I don't know, but
I feel like if that's the case, the grief is just something that's sitting on top of a whole lot of other stuff that's underneath it.
yeah, I agree.
And that's what I mean. In some ways, when you have to deal with grief, it opens up this possibility of healing other injuries, mental injuries that you didn't even know you had. And so it's actually an opportunity, because, you know, a lot of times those little injuries are, you just ignore them. You know, they're just not that important. At least you don't think they are, until something bigger comes along, and then it's just compounded. And you have to deal with it. Well, I had to.
Well, I was thinking about that, like what I think you might be alluding to. I was thinking about this just before our little chat here, about having to go through it, not around it, because that's how the things get piled up, is when you keep going around things instead of through things. And that's totally my style, is to go around it. But
Absolutely.
you can't just let this pile up. That's
Oh
too
my God.
heavy.
When you said that, I had this immediate vision of a hoarder in a
Yes.
house. Okay.
Yes.
And I have actually seen people who do this, and they'll have like one room that's normal. That's like where they can have guests. But if you went down the hall, it would be like, oh my God, you know, and it's essentially, they just can't get rid of anything. So you have to kind of walk through it, because there isn't any more room. And that's what happens with, you know, really difficult things that happen in your life. If you don't deal with them, you can't get through. It's like eventually you have to stop, and you have to deal with it. So.
Yeah.
That is such a strong, strong visual. And I think it's really important to say that, like in the case of a hoarder, generally speaking, there's no absolutes. Most often these people do much better when a professional can come in and support them and guide them and help them through. And so every grief experience is different as well, isn't it? You both spoke about seeing therapists and how it has been helpful for you. So it's important to say that we are all coaches on here, and that's very different than a therapist or a counselor. So we are not trying to give anybody expert advice. We're talking about our own experiences and what has worked for us. And every grief experience is different, isn't it? You know, you both talked about experiences where someone may have PTSD or other deep, deep wounds, and those things matter too. So it's not just one little package, is it? It's
No.
not one little neat package. I think it's important to understand that whether you're a person dealing with, there's no way to say this to make it make sense and not sound like I'm trying to trivialize it, but one loss is very different, not more or less, but it looks different, and it may be less complicated than something that has many other losses compounding it. And I don't think I've ever talked to anybody who had one loss that didn't have complications with it, secondary wounds, etc. But these things, no one loss is the same as another, is it?
No.
And for me, it's really helpful to remember that we have those choices, as Sandy said, and we can make the choice to do the work, to find someone who can support us in the work, whether it be a coach, a therapist, a counselor, a support group, a neighbor that you walk with, the dog that you talk to, who probably kept me from losing my mind.
Mine did. Definitely.
Exactly. And when he died, I grieved that death too. And it's kind of funny. I was talking to someone about the dog not very long ago, and guess who was a weepy mess because I missed my boy. So has the grief, is there a piece of it? I don't know. I feel like you've both put this so well so many times, that spectrum. It's no longer deepest violet. Maybe it's the light lavender. Or maybe
Yeah,
I'm the
maybe we
close
should just
to.
be the ones to make up words.
Let's do that. Let's come up with our own dictionary. It'll be a book we all put together.
Well, you know, the other thing too is I think as you walk through healing from some of the grief, that what starts to become more in your mind are the really happy times. You know, it's like, I think the more that you can think about that, I think that is kind of a guide, at least for me, on understanding how you're getting better,
Mhm.
you know, how things are getting better.
Yeah,
makes-
well, and I think too, I had just a lot really close together. There was my child, and then 15 months later, my husband, and then 5 months later, my mom. But when we lost our child, we immediately jumped into pretending she's in the room with us and goofing around with her. You know, like my husband would do all the, you know, the stupid dad puns, and he would try to wait for a high five from her, and she would, you know, walk away and not give him the satisfaction of that high five because it was just too nerdy of a pun. So he would do that, and I'd be like, you do not get a high five from Katie, you know. Or so we kind of like brought her into the conversation very early on. Yes, we were still grieving, yes, we were devastated, but that kind of became habit. And then when I lost him, I continued to do that like immediately, as though he was in the room. So I don't know, for other people when they're experiencing something for the first time, like they're a massive, really shocking loss for the first time, and they don't have that ability, you know, it's very, very profound. Like, so yeah, I think everybody needs their own pace too. That's another thing people bring up. How long is it going to be before I can feel da 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 da? They want the precise time. You know, it takes time, and it takes work. You can't just wait for it to happen.
Yeah, and
And
there's
don't-
no way of knowing, how it's going to go.
We don't get to have that answer. Yeah.
But isn't it helpful to be told you will feel better someday?
Mhm.
There will come a time when you'll be able to say their name and smile.
Think so, but right now I'm in a different place. I might not have felt that way, you know,
Right.
shortly afterwards.
Yeah, like I was saying in the beginning, you don't even want to feel better because that
No.
pain keeps you connected somehow.
Yeah,
It can
or,
feel like a betrayal, right?
Right.
or just impossible,
Yeah.
impossible. You know?
Yeah. You don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly. I was told by many people, well, it's different for you because I really loved my person.
Oh, wow.
And so of course I feel this way. Okay. And it made, you know, I'd hear those things and they weren't said to be unkind. These people were in deep, deep pain too. And there, it would make me sit there and say, huh, do I not love this person the same way? And so I'd have the conversation with myself, say, well, of course I do, or I wouldn't be a mess.
Hmm.
So there is that when we sort of take our own emotional temperature and we imagine somebody else's might be similar. You know, me feeling the way I did, I'm sure felt very disrespectful to some people.
Yeah,
So
I
you
can
both,
remember after my sister's funeral, you know, it's an Irish Catholic family with an Irish Catholic funeral, with the Irish Catholics drinking heavily afterwards and people laughing. And I
Mhm.
was, you know, I'm 14, I'm not drinking. And I was so angry. How dare you laugh? You know, but that was tradition. You weep and you weep and you weep and then you party, you know?
and that's
So,
part of it.
mhm.
So
And
that might
now,
be,
you know, I've changed, of course, and I wouldn't think that that's so terrible now, but back then, oh, I was horribly offended.
so that's something we're going to have to make another whole different conversation about how have your ways changed to what's been helpful and what doesn't. Because when I think about this, I think that there's not any one way, is there? Certainly the way I grieved my horse when I was 13 years old was very different than the way I grieved the last dog that died about 8 years ago. You know, I'm not going to take this to humans, though I certainly grieved these animals more than some of the humans, and I'm sorry, but I wasn't as close to some of the humans as I was the animals. So does grief last forever? I think it can. I think it can also change. I don't feel like there's a hard and fast answer. So I'm going to give each one of you a chance to give your thoughts before we wrap this up. Dawn, what are your thoughts about this? How can you sort of say, does grief last forever? What do you think?
What I'm going to say is, because I believe grief is an emotion. That's a very complicated emotion. And so I will say that it will last forever, just like joy lasts forever. Happiness lasts forever. It's not like you're never, ever going to feel it again. You're going to feel all of those emotions. So to me, it's not a sad thing. It is just simply another aspect of life. And if, to me, it's just different when you've had some difficult circumstances. But I think in a lot of ways, it makes you appreciate it when it's not so difficult. I mean, it's like, every one of them isn't terribly difficult for me anyway. That's been my experience. And so when my mom died, it was like, that was the easiest one by far, because I had done so much that's the other thing, is look at your relationships while you have people with you. And if there are things that need to be said, then that is how you need to say them, even if they don't understand. You say it for yourself, and with love, always with love. And because it just makes it so much easier. That was because I had the time, there was time there. So that was good. Yeah. So yes, it does last forever, but so does all the good stuff.
I think that's a fascinating point of view. We are so going to dive deep into that another time. How about you, Sandy? What are your thoughts? Does grief last forever?
I think I want to pick Don's brain for a while. Okay, so I guess for now, I always change my mind about things. So I hate to say, but this is what I think, and have it be hard and fast. But the definition of grief is deep sorrow, especially caused by someone's death. So if that is the definition, the deep sorrow, I would say, no, it doesn't necessarily have to last forever. But I think, like I said, we have to choose to put intention and work into healing. It is possible. Not everybody knows that it's possible. Not everybody knows what resources there are out there. But yeah, now listening to Dawn, I just want to change my mind.
So we should date stamp this and say, as of this date, this is your thought. And I think that's fair. That's such a beautifully human place to come from, that this is how I feel right now. And tomorrow over coffee, it might have changed.
Oh, I'd love that. I'd love that. I'd love to come back in 5 years and say, okay, how do you feel now?
Mm-hmm.
And isn't that part of this whole experience, that it's completely fair and reasonable that somebody may feel this is going to be their entire existence, especially when they're in that new place of grief, whether the loss was traumatic, expected, unexpected, whether the person was 2 days old or 104, they get to feel what they feel.
Yeah. Well, and I've been very, very close to someone who's been grieving very intensely, and when is this going to feel better type of thing. And I'm like, I feel better now than I did a year ago, so it's a progression,
I love that. I think that's so well put. So I want to thank you both for joining me for this conversation, and I can't wait to have lots more of them. Dawn, would you please like to tell us a little bit about you and how someone might be able to contact you?
Yes, I'm primarily a writer. I'm totally open to being a coach, and I'm a certified coach. But I haven't exactly figured out how I'm going to make that come to fruition and how that's going to work. I know the writing is going to come first because I've been doing that. So you can read my writing at dawnlaurenanderson.com. And on that same spot, you could sign up for my blog, which it's not every week, but it's close to it.
And by the way, it's excellent.
Thank
So I
you.
do recommend it.
Oh,
I'm signing up.
All right.
You'll be glad you did. I'm so glad you were here tonight, Dawn. And Sandy, would you like to tell us a little about you? I know you're not accepting clients right now, but if you'd like to tell us a little bit about you, we'd love to know.
Okay, so I'm also a certified master grief coach trained by Sandy Walden. I am not starting yet with taking clients. When I do, I will have a focus on suicide grief. I will probably start off with siblings of suicide. But stay tuned. I will most likely put my information on Sandy Walden's website, if that's okay.
Perfect. It's of course you are always welcome to. And I want to thank you both for joining me for this conversation. I'm Sandy Walden. I do offer Master Grief Coach certification as well as a grief healing course, because it is my belief that we have the opportunity to heal our grief. And that doesn't look the same for all of us. It looks different. For some of us, it's something we can do on our own. For some, we need to turn to a coach or counselor, or therapist, or someone different. And so there's no one hard and fast way to do it. But I believe that we can feel better and hold our loved ones in our heart with a little bit of a smile on our face. So thank you for joining me for this amazing conversation, and I look forward to so many more. Namaste.
Namaste.
Stay.